On the morning of May 29, 1453, the walls that had protected civilization for over 1,000 years finally fell. The city of Constantinople, jewel of the Byzantine Empire and bridge between East and West, surrendered to the Ottoman forces of Sultan Mehmed II. This was not merely the conquest of a city. It was the end of the Roman Empire, the closing of the medieval world, and the opening of a new era in human history. To understand the magnitude of this moment, we must first understand what Constantinople was. Founded in 330 AD by the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, Constantinople had been deliberately designed as the new Rome, a Christian capital for a Christian empire. Situated on a peninsula where Europe meets Asia, where the waters of the Golden Horn meet the Bosphorus Strait, the city occupied perhaps the most strategically valuable location in the known world. Every trade route between East and West passed through its harbors. Every army marching between continents had to reckon with its walls. For 11 centuries, Constantinople had stood as the greatest city in Christendom. While Rome fell to barbarians in the 5th century, while Western Europe descended into the chaos of the Dark Ages, Constantinople endured. Its massive defensive walls, built and rebuilt over generations, had repelled siege after siege. Arabs, Persians, Bulgars, and Rus had all tried and failed to take the city. The Theodosian walls, completed in the early 5th century, consisted of a moat, an outer wall, an inner wall reaching 40 feet high, and 96 towers. Military historians would later call them the most formidable defensive system ever constructed in the ancient or medieval world. But by 1453, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former glory. Once stretching from Spain to Syria, from the Danube to the deserts of North Africa, the empire had been slowly dismembered over centuries. The Fourth Crusade of 1204 had seen Western Christian armies sack Constantinople itself, an act of betrayal from which Byzantium never fully recovered. The rise of the Ottoman Turks in Anatolia had cost the empire nearly all its Asian territories. By the mid-15th century, the Byzantine Empire consisted of little more than Constantinople itself, a few islands, and a strip of territory in the Peloponnese. The great city, once home to 500,000 souls, now sheltered perhaps 50,000 inhabitants within walls designed for 10 times that number. Yet Constantinople remained a prize beyond measure. Its libraries held the accumulated wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome. Its churches contained relics venerated throughout the Christian world. The Hagia Sophia, the Cathedral of Holy Wisdom built by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, stood as the greatest architectural achievement of the age, its massive dome seeming to float impossibly above the city. And strategically, whoever controlled Constantinople controlled the gateway between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, between the markets of Europe and the riches of Asia. The man who determined to take this prize was just 21 years old in 1453. Mehmed II had become Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in 1451, following the death of his father Murad II. Young, brilliant, and consumed by ambition, Mehmed had been educated by the finest scholars the Islamic world could provide. He spoke Turkish, Arabic, Greek, Latin, Persian, and Hebrew. He studied the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and from the moment he took power, he focused on a single obsession: the conquest of Constantinople. Previous Ottoman sultans had besieged the city and failed. Mehmed's own great-grandfather, Bayezid I, had blockaded Constantinople in the 1390s without success. But Mehmed believed he possessed advantages his predecessors had lacked. Ottoman military technology had advanced dramatically. Ottoman resources now far exceeded those of the dying Byzantine Empire, and Mehmed himself possessed a vision and ruthlessness to see the siege through to its conclusion, whatever the cost. His preparations were methodical and extraordinary. In 1452, he constructed a massive fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus, directly across from an existing Ottoman fortress on the Asian side. This new fortification, called Ramil-i-Hazari, allowed the Ottomans to control all shipping through the straits. Any vessel attempting to bring supplies or reinforcements to Constantinople could be intercepted. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos protested this construction, but he lacked the military power to prevent it. The noose was tightening. Mehmed also secured the services of a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who claimed he could build a cannon larger than any that had ever existed. The Byzantine Emperor, bankrupted by decades of decline, could not afford to pay Urban's price. Mehmed could, and so Urban went to work constructing a monster. The final product measured 27 feet in length and required a crew of 200 men to transport and operate. It could fire stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds. When tested, its roar could be heard 10 miles away. Nothing like it had ever been seen in warfare. By early April 1453, everything was ready. An Ottoman army estimated at between 80,000 and 100,000 men assembled outside Constantinople's land walls. The Ottoman fleet, numbering over 100 ships, controlled the Sea of Marmara and blockaded the city from the south. Mehmed established his command tent directly opposite the section of wall known as the Mesotekion, the middle wall, which military engineers had identified as the weakest point in Constantinople's defenses. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI could muster perhaps 7,000 defenders, including around 2,000 foreign volunteers. The Byzantine navy consisted of 26 ships. The Venetian colony in Constantinople contributed several galleys under the command of Girolamo Minato. The Genoese merchant colony in the suburb of Galata across the Golden Horn officially remained neutral, but individual Genoese warriors joined the defense, most notably Giovanni Giustiniani, a soldier of fortune, who arrived in January 1453 with 700 professional soldiers. Constantine, recognizing Giustiniani's military expertise, placed him in command of the land walls. The defenders faced an impossible task. The walls, though formidable, had not been properly maintained for decades. The Byzantine treasury was empty. Food stocks were limited. The population was weary from years of uncertainty and decline. Yet they prepared to resist with the courage born of desperation. They were defending not just a city but a civilization, not just their homes but their faith. Orthodox priests proclaimed that God would never permit the city of Constantine to fall to the infidel. Ancient prophecies spoke of deliverance at the darkest hour. The siege began on April 6, 1453. Ottoman artillery opened fire on the Theodosian walls. Urban's great cannon, positioned opposite the Mesotekion, began its work of destruction. Each time it fired, the massive weapon recoiled violently, requiring hours of cooling and realignment before it could be discharged again. But when its stone projectile struck the ancient walls, the impact was devastating. Sections of masonry that had stood for 1,000 years crumbled under the bombardment. The defenders worked through each night to repair the damage, filling breaches with timber, barrels of earth, and anything else they could find. Giustiniani organized the defense with professional skill, rotating his forces to ensure the most critical sections were always defended. But everyone understood that this was a battle of attrition they could not win. The Ottomans had nearly unlimited supplies of gunpowder and ammunition. The defenders had only their courage and their dwindling strength. On April 20th, a glimmer of hope appeared. 3 Genoese galleys sent by the Pope, along with a Byzantine ship carrying grain from Sicily, approached the city from the south. The Ottoman fleet moved to intercept them. What followed was a desperate naval battle within sight of the city walls. The larger Christian ships, aided by a favorable wind, used their superior height to advantage, fighting off swarms of Ottoman galleys. Ottoman sailors attempted to board, but were repelled with heavy losses. Finally, as the wind shifted, the 4 ships managed to break through and reach the safety of the Golden Horn. On the walls of Constantinople, defenders wept with joy at this small victory. Mehmed, watching from the shore, fell into a towering rage. He rode his horse into the sea, shouting at his admirals, threatening execution for their failure. This humiliation spurred him to a bold stratagem. If his fleet could not force the chain that the Byzantines had stretched across the entrance to the Golden Horn, he would bypass it entirely. Ottoman engineers constructed a wooden road greased with animal fat, running from the Bosphorus up and over the hill behind Galata and down to the Golden Horn. On the night of April 22nd, Ottoman sailors hauled 70 ships overland on this road, a distance of more than a mile, and launched them into the Golden Horn behind the Byzantine defenses. The defenders were stunned. Their northern flank, previously secure behind the Golden Horn's fortifications, was now exposed. Constantine was forced to stretch his already inadequate forces even thinner, diverting precious men from the land walls to guard against attacks from the harbor. An attempt by the Byzantines to destroy the Ottoman ships with a night raid failed when the plan was betrayed to the Ottomans. The captured raiders were executed in view of the city walls. Through May, the bombardment continued relentlessly. Mehmed launched several direct assaults on the walls, testing the defenses, seeking any weakness. Each attack was repelled, but at mounting cost. The defenders were exhausted, fighting day and night, with no prospect of relief. Negotiations took place. Mehmed offered Constantine generous terms: surrender the city and rule the Peloponnese as an Ottoman vassal, or accept safe passage for the population and vast wealth for himself. Constantine refused. He would not be the emperor who surrendered Constantinople. He reportedly said he was willing to die defending the city. By late May, everyone knew the end was approaching. Mehmed announced that a final, overwhelming assault would take place. He gave his troops 3 days to prepare and promised them the traditional right to plunder a conquered city for 3 days. Ottoman soldiers sharpened weapons, tested scaling ladders, and contemplated the legendary wealth of Constantinople. In the city, Constantine addressed his remaining commanders. Historical accounts tell us he spoke of duty, of honor, and of faith. He thanked the foreign volunteers who had chosen to stand with Constantinople in its final hour. He asked forgiveness from anyone he might have wronged. According to tradition, he attended a final service at the Hagia Sophia, praying before the altar of the great church. Orthodox and Catholic, Greek and Latin, united in this last moment before an uncertain fate. The final assault began in the early hours of May 29, 1453. The Ottomans attacked in waves, starting with irregulars and lightly armed troops, designed to exhaust the defenders. These first attackers were driven back, leaving the ground before the walls covered with dead and dying men. Then came the regular Ottoman infantry, better armed and more disciplined. They too were repelled, but the defenders were weakening. Many were wounded. All were desperately tired. At the critical moment, disaster struck the defenders. Giovanni Giustiniani, commanding the defense at the most crucial section of wall, was struck by a projectile that penetrated his armor. Badly wounded, he demanded to be taken from the walls to seek medical attention. Constantine begged him to stay, knowing that his departure would shatter the defenders' morale. But Giustiniani was carried away to a ship, where he would die of his wounds days later. His absence created confusion in the ranks. What would happen in the next few minutes would change the world forever. If you are enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel for more fascinating historical documentaries. Then Ottoman soldiers discovered that a small gate called the Kirkaporta, used for sorties, had been left unlocked. Approximately 50 Ottoman troops rushed through before defenders could close it again. Though small in number, their presence inside the walls caused panic. At nearly the same moment, Ottoman troops succeeded in planting their flags on top of the outer wall near the Mezatikian. The sight of Ottoman banners atop the walls triggered a collapse in the Byzantine defense. What happened next remains unclear in the historical sources, shrouded in the chaos and horror of urban combat. Constantine XI, last emperor of Rome, disappeared into the fighting. Some accounts say he removed his imperial regalia and charged into battle, preferring death to capture. His body was never definitively identified. The emperor of the Romans died as a simple soldier, defending his city to the last. Ottoman forces poured through breaches in the walls and through opened gates. The The streets of Constantinople became killing grounds. Soldiers hunted for plunder, breaking into houses and churches. Civilians were killed or enslaved. The exact death toll remains unknown, but thousands died in the sack of the city. The survivors faced enslavement, with columns of captives chained together and marched out of the city in the following days. Mehmed entered Constantinople in the afternoon of May 29th, riding through streets now eerily quiet after the morning's violence. He made his way to the Hagia Sophia. Soldiers had begun looting the great cathedral, tearing down precious metals and vandalizing mosaics. Mehmed ordered them to stop. He dismounted from his horse, bent down, and took a handful of earth, pouring it over his head in a gesture of humility before God. Then, ascending to the altar, he summoned an imam to proclaim the call to prayer. The Hagia Sophia, for 900 years the greatest church in Christendom, became a mosque. The immediate aftermath was devastating. Constantinople's libraries were ransacked, though many texts would eventually be preserved or copied. The city's artistic treasures were destroyed or dispersed. The Patriarch of Constantinople was initially imprisoned but later released. Mehmed showed unexpected pragmatism in his treatment of the conquered city. After 3 days of pillage, he ordered discipline restored. He encouraged Greeks to return to Constantinople and promised protection to those who did. He needed the city functioning if it was to serve as his capital, and capital it became. Mehmed, who would be known to history as Mehmed the Conqueror, renamed the city Istanbul and made it the center of the Ottoman Empire. He initiated a building program to restore and expand the city. Ottoman Constantinople would become one of the great metropolises of the early modern world, a cosmopolitan center of trade and culture. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through Europe. For centuries, Western Christians had viewed Constantinople as a bulwark against Eastern invasion, even as they had often failed to support it. Now that bulwark was gone, Pope Nicholas V called for a crusade to recapture the city, but Western powers were divided and the crusade never materialized. Venice and Genoa, the Italian maritime republics, had to negotiate new trading arrangements with the Ottoman Empire. The conquest had profound effects on European intellectual history. Byzantine scholars fleeing the fallen city brought with them manuscripts and knowledge of ancient Greek literature and philosophy. These scholars would contribute significantly to the Italian Renaissance, already underway, but now reinforced by an influx of classical learning. The fall of Constantinople, thus paradoxically, helped spark the rebirth of classical culture in Western Europe. The geopolitical consequences were equally profound, with the Ottomans now controlling the traditional trade routes between Europe and Asia. European merchants and monarchs began seeking alternative paths to the riches of the East. This search would eventually drive Portuguese and Spanish exploration down the coast of Africa and across the Atlantic Ocean. Christopher Columbus was just a year old when Constantinople fell, but he would grow up in a world where finding a western route to Asia seemed not just desirable but necessary. The age of European oceanic exploration was, in part, a consequence of Ottoman control of the eastern Mediterranean. For the Orthodox Christian world, the fall was a spiritual catastrophe. The city of Constantine II Rome had been the center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Now it was ruled by Muslim sultans. Moscow would eventually claim to be the Third Rome, the new center of Orthodox civilization. The consequences of this shift would echo through Russian history for centuries. The Ottoman Empire, meanwhile, entered its golden age. Mehmed II would continue his conquests, adding much of the Balkans and Anatolia to his domains. The Ottoman Empire would endure for nearly 5 more centuries, until its final dissolution after World War I. At its height in the 16th century under Suleiman the Magnificent, Ottoman power would threaten the very heart of Europe, besieging Vienna itself. Today, the Theodosian walls still stand, worn and crumbling but recognizable, a monument to both Byzantine engineering and Ottoman artillery. The Hagia Sophia, converted to a museum in the 20th century and recently returned to use as a mosque, remains one of the architectural wonders of the world. its massive dome still seeming to float impossibly above the city, now called Istanbul. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 stands as one of the pivotal moments in human history. It marked the definitive end of the ancient world and the beginning of the modern age. The Roman Empire, which had endured in the East for 1,000 years after Rome's fall in the West, was finally extinguished. The medieval world order, already crumbling, received its death blow. New powers, new technologies, and new ideas would shape the world that emerged from the rubble of Constantinople's walls. On that morning of May 29, 1453, when Ottoman soldiers first raised their banners atop the Theodosian walls, they were not merely conquering a city. They were closing one chapter of human history and opening another. The echoes of that moment resound across the centuries, reminding us that no empire endures forever, that every age must give way to the next, and that the consequences of a single day can shape the world for generations to come. The last defenders of Constantinople fought not for victory, which they knew was impossible, but for honor, for faith, and for the slim hope that future generations would remember their sacrifice. They lost their city, their empire, and for many, their lives, but they won their place in history. The fall of Constantinople remains one of the most dramatic and significant events of the medieval world, a story of courage and tragedy, of the end of one age and the beginning of another, a story that continues to captivate and instruct us more than 5.5 centuries later.